Welcome everyone, Costin here with a guide for Total War Warhammer 3 with my top 5 tips towards getting a good campaign start in Total War Warhammer 3 to allow you to dominate the campaign map. Having a good start, having the first 20-30 turns of your campaign being good will determine in a very large way how the rest of the campaign will play out. You want to be aggressive, you want to conquer as much territory as possible, and you certainly don't want to lose any major battles or any battles early on. That's what you should be aware of. Now, tip number 1, assess your starting situation, what your faction has to deal with, what enemies you have to deal with, what diplomatic options are available. So over here I have Karl Franz, the Emperor of the Empire. And we start with Altdorf, which I can already get into tier 2. Just going to start that from the very beginning. And we start with the barracks chain, which will eventually allow me to recruit captains, greatswords, huntsmen, etc. Though some of those things will be DLC units. And I have a rebellion in most of the Reichland and in Helmgard, which is guarding a strategic choke point towards the southwest. Now if I toggle the Fog of War, and this is a mod, I would strongly recommend it, we can also see that the situation here can be a bit complicated. We have Ram the Punch, who can be very aggressive towards us, and we've also got all of the Wood Elven factions, in particular Orion, who can also be very aggressive towards us. So capturing Helmgard, dealing with this rebellion, is my first and most important campaign goal at the start of a campaign. But then there is another problem for Karl Franz to deal with, and that is the Empire itself. The Empire relies on imperial authority. The more you have, the better off you'll be. You can use it for certain things like confederations, but if you get the lower, you can get the civil war where all the elector counts declare war on you, and you also suffer significant downsides in terms of your growth, control, economy, and leadership. So you want to keep it up. Now how you deal with that is you have to prevent the elector counts from being destroyed, from their, or rather you have to prevent their provincial capitals from being taken over. That's how the system works. Getting these elector counts, or rather their capitals, will give you some significant advantages. Each of them will give you an item, as well as a benefit towards the lord you make an elector count and a special unit that you can get. But for Karl Franz, his bigger problem is the state of the entire empire. He's got issues like Festus, Draika, and Vlad. And if you're playing a campaign as him, you are going to have to deal with those threats while trying to keep the threats from the south contained and maybe keeping Marienburg happy so they don't declare war on you. So assessing your early game situation is critical to understanding what you're going to be doing in a campaign. Like as Karl Franz, I know that either Gram or Orion, or both, may end up declaring war on me and trying to march through Helmgard to take my territory. I also know that I have Durfu over here, who is going to be a problem, and Vlad also is going to be a problem. Vlad and Festus, if you allow them to grow out of control, they will become major problems in their own right. So all of those are issues you need to deal with. And that's something you need to understand going into a campaign like this. And this applies for every legendary lord. Every legendary lord has their own problems. Like if you're playing Katrin, you have to deal with the Norskins in the Southern Oblast, then Frat, Trog, Azazel, all those kind of issues. So everyone has their own issues, everyone has their enemies. Understanding, figuring out what those enemies are going to be, how those things are going to play out. A lot of it can be gleaned through diplomacy. You can see which factions like you, dislike you, or you can use the toggle Fog of War to give you that kind of information. Now, with that said, the second thing you should be aware of is your difficulty settings. Now, this campaign is set on very hard and very hard battle difficulty. Now, campaign difficulty affects things like your income, your upkeep, your public order, and so on and so forth, as well as the AI's upkeep and income. The higher the difficulty, the more money the AI gets for free. And the battle difficulty gives certain stats in battles, but also crucially affects your chance in auto-resolve. So the higher the difficulty in battle is set, the more casualties you're going to take in auto-resolve. So for instance, if I were to auto-resolve this battle on very hard, I would take quite a few casualties, whereas I would take very few casualties if I were to fight them manually. One of the things you can do to really improve your campaigns and improve your quality of life is set the battle difficulty to easy when it's your turn or when you're about to fight the battle. You can do this just before the battle. You don't have to do it before you move your hero. You can do it while you're in the battle deployment screen and then auto-resolve to reduce your casualties. Now, bear in mind that if you do intend to play on a higher difficulty, that messing around with this setting or leaving it on easy will change the behavior of the AI. So a bit of advice with that: if you want the AI to be a bit more effective and actually present some level of challenge, you want to, yes, fight your battles on easy, so you don't have to fight a bunch of meaningless battles on your own, especially garrison battles like at Grunberg. But then before you end your turn, or if you're doing it when the AI is attacking you, you want to set it back to very hard, because it is going to affect the AI decision making. Now, on top of that, we should also talk about, if we're still on the subject of auto-resolve, we should talk about how the auto-resolve works. The auto-resolve works based on the value of your army. Things like having a legendary lord, the level of said lord, the ranks of the units, and the quality of those units. Though quality might be a bit misleading. When it comes to unit quality, what the auto-resolve really cares about, it feels like it cares about two things far more than others. It cares about armor, so a unit like Great Swords will do better in auto-resolve than other units, will increase your value in auto-resolve, or a unit like Reichsguard, as opposed to a unit like Archers, which have low armor. Though getting Archers early on is certainly the way to go, because they're pretty cheap. They're some of the cheapest units you have available, though they are a DLC unit, and range firepower is certainly the way to go for the Empire, even though there are a bunch of ranged issues. But you should be aware of that. And the value that your army has is also going to affect some other things on the campaign map as well. Or rather, the value your armies in general have will affect your faction and your diplomacy choices on the campaign map as well. Now, number 3 is related to diplomacy. So diplomatic deals are obviously very important in this game, but using diplomacy very carefully is going to be important to your success in a campaign. So early on in a campaign, when you start, you may make non-aggression pacts, trade agreements, military access, defensive alliances, even from the very start of your campaign or from very early on. And while these might be beneficial, obviously trade is generally beneficial with any faction, really. There are some downsides with it. Like with the defensive alliance, don't make a defensive alliance with a faction you're not interested in defending or in joining their war. So for instance, Paravan over here has a starting enemy in Talsin, which is Orion. So if I were to, say for instance, make a defensive alliance with them, that would not only push me to defend Paravan if another faction declares war on them, like say for instance Grom is over here, he's neighbors with them, he's quite likely to declare war against them. Not only would that push me into a war with Grom when I don't want that, because I don't want to focus on Bretonnia, I have things to deal with in the Empire as Karl Franz in this example. And depending on the faction you're playing, you will encounter this situation more often than not. But that's one thing. But if I were to make, say, a non-aggression pact with Paravan or a trade agreement with Paravan, because they are available as a trading partner, they're not particularly willing, but that's because I have already plenty of trading partners. But if I were to make a non-aggression pact with them, or make a non-aggression pact with Karak Norn, then that would piss off the factions that they are already at war with. So if you increase your diplomatic relations with a faction by making deals with them, you're going to piss off their enemies. So with Karak Norn, I piss off Durfu. With Paravan, I piss off Orion. And it's quite likely that they might decide that I am a major threat to deal with. Or they might decide to take the opportunity, because of the negative diplomatic relations, to declare war on me. One great example of this, one that you can avoid, is actually Catherine's situation. Like, both Karl Franz and Catherine have complicated situations at the start of their campaigns, if you do decide to play them. For Catherine, she's got Draika and she's got Azak, and she can end up in a war with both of them, and she doesn't want to end up in a war with either of them, because she's got threats to the north to deal with. But one of the surefire ways to ensure that you get into a war with either one or even both of them is to make deals with Ostermark. She can make deals with Ostermark from very early on in her campaign, but it's the last thing you want to do as Catherine. In fact, even though Kislev and the Empire are allies in the lore, one of your best moves as Catherine would actually be to declare war on the Ostermark. And same with Karl Franz. It might actually be worth it for me to declare war on Paravan, especially when they're on their last legs. Because when they're on their last legs, they're not going to be afraid. Like when Orion does eventually get finish recruiting his forces over here, and he marches his army into Paravan and wipes their army out, there's not really going to be a risk to Helmgart, especially if I level up Helmgart. You got to be careful with this. You got to be careful with diplomacy and just not rush willy-nilly into it. Now, another thing that's going to be very significant in a campaign in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, diplomatically speaking, is your strength rank. Your strength rank is basically where you stand compared to all other factions on the campaign map in terms of your faction strength. But what is it measured by? Well, it's measured by your armies. How many armies you have, how strong they are. I think it's based on the value of each army, like how costly each army is. But either way, it is based on the value of your armies. Now, it's a double-edged sword. If you're weak, if you're a weak faction, then the AI may decide to declare war on you. One of the things to know in Warhammer 3 is that the AI is very predisposed against you as the player. It's predisposed against you in pretty much every Total War game, I believe. In some less than others, but very much so in this one. I think Shogun 2 is probably the highest when it comes to that, especially with Realm Divide. By the way, if you're weak, the AI may be more willing to attack you, even if it's a relatively neutral faction. Or if you have a weak flank, for instance, here Helmgart, it's undefended, it doesn't have an army to protect it, then the AI coming from the south, the dwarves, Paravan, the wood elves, may decide, oh, that's prime real estate, and come and attack you. However, in a similar vein, if you are too strong, if you're strength number 1, then everyone is going to see you see you as a strategic threat if you become too powerful. So when it comes to early game decisions, what does this mean really? Well, there are some factions, not necessarily Karl Franz actually, but there are certainly some factions, some races, where you can get a very high strength rating very quickly. Some examples that I can give in this particular area are the vampire counts. You can recruit a lot of units for cheap very early on, get a lot of armies going very early on. Or the greenskins, in particular Grom the Paunch, you can recruit an absurd level of armies. And what ends up happening if you're doing that as Grom the Paunch is quite likely a lot of the factions, if not all of the factions that border you, will declare war against you within the first 20 turns. So you want to balance it out. You don't want to become too strong. Like if you're recruiting a second army or a third army, because that's what it really boils down to. How many armies you're recruiting and when are you recruiting them? it's not just the economy. Obviously, the economy plays a major role in this, and you should never recruit an army if you can't sustain it. Like, I can't necessarily sustain 2 stacks over here. Like, I've got 11 units, but I'm really reaching the limit of my economy. And beyond that, I'm also pushing, beyond the fact that I'm pushing the limit of my economy, which means that my income is going lower. But on top of that, of course, I'm having less money to actually get the structures that I need in the Reichland over here. Because, for instance, I want to get some other structures here. Like, I would love to get this particular landmark, the Redwood Inn. I'd like to get another weaving house. So having too many armies, while you might be able to initially afford them, and hell, even if you do have the income to support them, may not necessarily be the smartest idea in every decision. It's a balancing act, at least early on. You need to be careful about this, because it is easy, with certain factions, especially vampire counts, greenskins, etc., to get to a very high strength rank, and then collapse very quickly. Furthermore, your strength ranking, since it is affected by the strength of your armies, if your armies get weakened or they get wiped out, for instance, over here, I'm strength ranking 69, and if I attack the fortress over here, I would obviously lose this army. But even if I lowered the difficulty or fight the battle manually, right? If I lowered the difficulty, then get decisive victory, my strength ranking is going to be affected there. I hope I have enough movement points. Nope, I don't.
See no other option. I am France.
That might come bite me in the ass, by the way. Another thing to be aware of. But my strength ranking, even though it's not going to be reflected until the end turn, my strength ranking is actually going to drop as a result of the decision that I made over there. So just be aware of those kind of decisions, the slippery slope, and essentially this is why, one big reason why you never want to lose a main army or suffer such significant casualties as I just did here. Now, the final tip is with regards to the battles themselves. In battles, you have, beyond your army and the enemy army, you also have the balance of power. This basically represents the value of your army against the enemy army. Now, the value is dependent on the units, and units that are particularly good are going to add more value. If you gain a significant advantage in this meter, then the enemy can break completely on the battlefield, just literally rout from the battlefield. Army losses, it's called. One of the ways to do it, of course, is to kill a lot of the enemy, but also lose fewer men. This is why ranged armies in particular were such a major thing in Warhammer 2, because it was a good way of triggering the army losses. And still are a good way of triggering the army losses even now. But that's only part of the equation. Another thing to be said here, and a really good way of triggering those army losses, is to, of course, kill the enemy lord. This is why sniping a lord is so very, very powerful, especially with certain factions. The Wood Elves in particular are really good with this. But if I can kill Festus in this battle, then this particular battle is going to become much easier for me to deal with than it would if I just ignore him and deal with his army one portion at a time. And that's all you really need to know. Just a couple of tips to get you started, to get you ahead in Immortal Empires, if you're uncertain as to what you want to do. Also, killing heroes will help with these kind of things. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.